Just setting a little timer here. Hey, everybody. Happy Tuesday. It's Tuesday, right? Cool. I'm James Glasscock. I'm from a project called the Reserve Protocol. Today, we're going to talk about something really fun. Hope you enjoy it. It's called the Big Bang of Stablecoins. I have some unpopular opinions. A lot of folks out in the world think there's going to be one stablecoin to rule them all. And maybe that'll be true in 100 years, but we're in this sort of great unbundling right now. Everything's unraveling. Lots of experimentations happening. I'm going to take you through it. And I think what's possible in this decade, the next 6 years, is you're going to see the first $1 trillion stablecoin, and you're going to see several $10 to $100 billion stablecoins. So let's see if I can just get into it for you. QR code, please scan it if you want to dive into the Reserve ecosystem or stay in touch. I'll show this again at the end. I'm going to start with the bad news first. So first up, the US dollar. You've all heard of it. It's used in about 67% of global exchange today, transactions. Sadly, though, about $34 trillion in debt. When I was thinking about this presentation a year ago, it was 31 trillion on the slide, so it's grown quite a bit in just a year. And purchasing power of the US dollar, you can buy about 2 to 3 times less today than you could 4 years ago. And it's about 9 times less than you could buy back in the 70s. So this is not a good trend, obviously. We're in another pandemic. This is a really big one. This is price increases across 30 countries around the world since the 60s. So you see it's kind of happening everywhere. You know, I started the presentation with the US dollar, but that's not really what this is about. All of these economic systems are really tied together because of the current global reserve currency. There is some good news, though. The whole rest of this presentation is good news, I think. Okay, cool. This is a really fun chart. This is techno revolutions. Starts with 3 phases: installation, panic, and deployment. This is inspired by Carlota Perez, if any of you follow her as an author and researcher. What you're seeing here are the 5 techno revolutions. The current one being digital information and communications. And I've appended that and put in the and value, right? The exchange of value, the next generation value, internet of value. And what's really interesting is there's kind of like a revolution happening inside of revolutions here. Before I go a little further, I just showed you a chart with a bunch of S-curves. And you might be familiar with that, or you might be wondering, what is that? So this is just a quick explainer on how S-curve adoption works. It starts with innovators and early adopters, early majority, late majority, and on to laggards. I'd say in the space of crypto right now, we're somewhere between the innovators and the early adopters phase. We've barely started. As much as all of us love the space and love the excitement, the truth is 99% of the world is not using it yet. I can't wait till that happens. I think maybe we'll see 10% of the world using it on a monthly basis this decade, which would be really cool. There's a perfect storm happening. This is just an overlay of that debt curve on top of these technological revolutions. Let's see if I want to make sure I didn't skip that. Yep. So what do I mean when I say revolutions inside of revolutions? Well, really, I think there are like 5 forces that have been happening since the 70s. One of them is digital, this idea of being able to manipulate electrons instead of atoms. The second one kind of started in the early 1980s, open source, where you only have to solve each problem once. You share it with anyone. They can fork it and build on top of it. Which leads us into composability, the idea of remixing software or really anything like Legos, right? Could be e-commerce, could be videos on YouTube for that matter. And then this other kind of phenomenon, which started, in the late 2000s, blockchains, being able to coordinate permissionless work and prevent this double spend problem. There's another sort of major force here, which we're all aware of. They've been working on it for over 50 years, but for the mass market, it's only started this decade, which is AI. That gets really interesting because now we're talking about machine economies, which are kind of freed of meat space physics. AI is not going to be using fiat money. That's my bet. Let's see, what are the impacts of this? Really, democratizing the tools of production, democratizing the tools of distribution, and what that allows is the ability to hyperconnect supply and demand. This applies to a lot of different industries. I'm going to get into it, including what I think it will also apply is with stable coins and with digital currency. There's a book, actually it was an essay in 2004. It became a book in 2006. It's called The Long Tail. I thought it was pretty cool back then. It's really about this idea of the future of business is about selling less of more. At the time this conversation was applied to a lot of these digital, .com companies, folks like Amazon and Rhapsody Music, which was a predecessor to iTunes at the time. But businesses really being able to build really sustaining, thriving ecosystems without having all the hits. Although, if you were to go to Amazon today, they have the hits and they have the niche brands as well. What is the long tail? So it represents the significant demand for niche products that emerge in digital markets. There's the head of the tail, which is the vertical part, popularity, and then the long part that on the x-axis there, which is the number of products. And I'm going to just show you what that looks like in a few industries. Before I get there, I already talked about this, but there's these three expansion stages for the long tail. The first one is democratizing the tools of production. Second one is democratizing tools of distribution. And when you can do that in digital networks, you're hyper-connecting supply and demand wherever it is in the world. That becomes really interesting because you could build a $10 billion economy which as a standalone could thrive and be sustainable over time. It's something you can do now and you'll be able to do in the next few decades that you couldn't have done 20 years ago, 20, 30 years ago. Probably the closest to it would be something like Starbucks rewards programs, the currency system in Roblox, or World of Warcraft, or something like that. So there have been some of these on smaller scale in some of those closed networks, but you're going to see a lot more of that in the future. What can other digital transformations teach us? Well, I'm going to just go through like shopping, broadcasting, and mobile apps as an example. So again, we have the long tail. Back in the 1980s, there's tens of thousands of stores on Earth. Lots of people would go to the shopping mall, and all the stores were in one place. That was the most convenient way to find whatever you wanted to shop for. The world has changed a lot since then. Now there's tens of millions of stores, maybe more, depending on how you count them. Any product, any store is at your fingertips. Just real quick on the Shopify, on the e-commerce side, Shopify alone, I think, has about 1.7 million stores on the platform today. 4 or 5 competitors make up the rest of that, not counting, Etsy stores and Amazon markets and so forth. Next one is video broadcasting business. I came from this industry back in the day before crypto. In the 1980s, there were about 100,000 hours of video content created per year. Today, it's about 300,000 hours created every day. TikTok, YouTube, all that stuff. So you're seeing these kinds of platform businesses enable all kinds of folks to either be successful professionals or just be hobbyists. One thing that is really interesting about the long tail is it tends to be about 0.1% that really make a living from it. So it's not everyone thriving off of it. Most of us are consumers of it, but it's a really small amount, maybe 0.1 to maybe 1% that build, that become the Mr. Beast on YouTube or the biggest e-commerce store on Shopify. Do one more example here, phones, mobile apps. In the 1990s, there were 2 apps. You could talk on the phone or you could text your friend. Today, there are millions of apps. There's 2 million apps in the Apple App Store alone. There's even more than that in Google Android. So this phenomena that is happening in lots of different digital ecosystems, why shouldn't it happen with money? What happened was free tools, creativity, infinite distribution, and incentives. And you're seeing this happen across all kinds of crypto ecosystems, and I'll talk more about stablecoins here in a minute. But the mere fact that there are 15,000 plus tokens on CoinMarketCap gives you some sense of what's happening out there. Lots of experimentation. Obviously, some of the projects are questionable, but nonetheless, it's an interesting leaderboard for creativity, experimentation, and capitalism. Let's go back to money. A lot of what I'm talking about here is about kind of, I think, analog versus digital. The money system, the money system most people around the world use is an analog system. It's even today's most popular stable coins, the duopoly of Tether and USDC. These are the equivalent of the New York Times website in 1996 being a PDF copy of the newspaper, right? These are first-generation stable coins. Will people care about first-generation stable coins in a decade? I don't think anyone cares about first-generation internet companies anymore. They've all mostly been absorbed or dissolved or whatever. New innovations take their place. So what's possible between analog money and digital money? I won't read through the details of the slide, other than to maybe call out, you get a lot more programmable features with digital money. You can do some really interesting things with privacy and revenue sharing and asset backing, and you can do it all on chain. There's no CEO, there's no office, there's no issuer. It's all done in smart contracts, and that becomes a really interesting mechanism for building a future world currency. And maybe thousands of experiments before someone lands on, the so-called winner there. I think I'll just say on the last piece here, permissionless creation and composability unlocks free market innovation. To me, that's one of the most exciting things about next generation stablecoins that operate on chain and can be created by anyone in this room for free in about 20 minutes. This is Vitalik's stablecoin categorization. He was part of an essay at the end of 2022. It's a nice framework for looking at what are the different categories. I won't read through it, but you can kind of see the 3 main categories that he highlighted: centralized stablecoins, DAO-governed, RWA-backed stablecoins, and governance-minimized crypto-backed stablecoins. It's one of the cleaner sort of organization tables I've seen for stablecoins, so I like to include it here. A lot of people don't know this. There's already 200 stablecoins. About a year ago, when I was thinking about this presentation, there were less than 100. So it's growing really fast. Again, not all of them are going to make it. Most of them won't, but we're seeing some really cool innovations along the way. And other folks will come along and build on top of those innovations or those failures so that we can ultimately have a really resilient currency that lasts over centuries. I think this is a really important part of where the future of stablecoins is going. They all have different jobs to be done. You know, we're kind of coming off this analog paradigm where it was just about unit of account, medium of exchange, and store of value. And it had to be simple, right? It was an analog system, kind of superficially set up with network effects. You know, if you dig into kind of the history of the U.S. dollar when when that debt curve went way up, that was about the time that we kicked away the gold standard and had an arrangement with OPEC on oil pricing, which has given the United States and the dollar quite a bit of network effects globally. And sometimes that's been abused, sadly. But here's a bunch of stable coins with different jobs to be done. I'll highlight a couple. DAI, we're all familiar with, one of the first stable coins for on-chain natives. Tether and USDC were both, centralized custodian stable coins. Both of them, it's kind of the same playbook initially, bolting onto an exchange for network effects. USD3 here at the bottom is a cool one. This one's actually on the Reserve Protocol. It's a yield-bearing blue-chip stablecoin index. It's got some over-collateralization protection for like bank runs and black swan events, which is nice. There's even more stable jobs to be done for stablecoins. Just highlighting a few more here, Curve USD, which launched last year. It's got a really interesting borrower-friendly soft liquidation engine that people are liking, and the protocol's already been forked at least once or twice, so it's exciting to see that take off. So lots of different stablecoins, each with specific jobs to be done. And it's possible we'll all figure out what the right jobs are to be done in 20 or 40 years, and maybe that will all land in one stablecoin. But in the meantime, we're just going to see an incredible amount of experimentation. So how do we accelerate stable currencies that retain their value over centuries? The answer is lots of experiments, and not all the experiments are going to succeed. These are our tokens created on the Reserve Protocol. That's the project I work with. Call them next-gen stablecoins. What do I mean by that? Really, these 5 functions that are all on-chain. Asset backing on-chain, programmable revenue sharing on-chain, creation, mint, and redeem is all on-chain, default protection on-chain, and lastly, governance by stakers on-chain. Quick background on the Reserve ecosystem, now on 3 chains, Ethereum, Arbitrum, and Base. About $150 million of TVL, and over 1,000 of these R tokens have already been created on the Reserve Protocol. Now, is everyone using the 1,000? No, but probably about 10 or 12 of them are pretty popular in different pockets of experimentation. This is kind of unboxing an R token. Specifically, the Web3 dollar, USD3, launched earlier this year. It's been growing quite a bit. It's backed by a basket of USDC, PayPal, and DAI. You might wonder, well, why are stablecoins being created backed by other stablecoins? Well, what you get out of this is some diversification and over-collateralization protection. There's a future, though, where our tokens could be backed by a basket of 100 different assets, commodities, stocks, bonds, real estate. Thus far today, there's not enough of those assets on-chain with sufficient liquidity to build really resilient stablecoins. But that's what's coming over the next 10 years. This is the URL. If anyone in here would like to deploy their own R token, it's just app.reserve.org/deploy. It's kind of like a what you see is what you get type of interface. You don't need any coding experience. You choose your collateral plugins, you choose your revenue sharing. If you want to launch a stablecoin for a new video game or a new community or help a sovereign nation, the tools are right here. It's free to use. Our tokens all require collateral plugins. Here's a sampling of a few that are available in the protocol right now. Some names you'll definitely recognize. There's about 60 plugins available on the RToken deployer. Usually, you want to build stable currencies with stable assets, at least on the Reserve protocol. I'm familiar with lots of other designs out there that are doing some cool stuff with perps and so forth. But just to, actually, I want to highlight one more thing here. What's interesting about this yield-bearing basket for USD3, I believe Token Bryce yesterday talked about Blue Chip, bluechip.org. It's a stablecoins rating agency. The folks who deployed USD3 wanted to build a blue chip B or better asset basket. So that's why it has DAI, PayPal USD, and USDC in the basket. You can go to bluechip.org, read the risk ratings there, and find out why are those rated a B. I think Tether is rated a D or an F, and you'll find other interesting ratings for other stablecoins on bluechip.org. Who might deploy these new stablecoins in the future? All kinds of folks. You might just sort of think usually it's got to be a large protocol or a government or someone like that, but the reality is it can be any of these groups here on the screen. I know my time's ticking and I want to save time for some Q&A, so I'm going to skip through. Lot going on here on the Big Bang, but I talked about these 5 forces earlier: digital, open source, composability, blockchains, and AI. And really, these forces around like free tools and creativity and permissionless access, this is really what's enabling this idea of a stablecoin Big Bang. These tech, political, and socioeconomic factors. What I think is probably possible this decade is you're going to see thousands of experiments, and as I opened with, we'll see the first $1 trillion stablecoin. We might see $4 or $5 trillion of stablecoins by the end of this decade, which would be about 5% of M2 money. This is a fun little staircase of how to grow traction for stablecoins. I spend a lot of time thinking about this. Where do you start and where are you going with this? And for our tokens, it's starting with on-chain natives, people who really believe in smart contracts. Believe it, I don't think I have to convince anybody in the room, but there's a whole bunch of folks out there that think the architecture of Tether or USDC is the way of the future. Centralization and trusting people and things like that. So as we work our way up the staircase here, you'll see it going from on-chain natives to the rest of the world. A lot of people that are not on-chain yet. 2 that I really want to highlight at the top there are the difference between growth industries and slow industries. Those are pretty interesting, and it'll make a little bit more sense here on the next slide. This is just an example of where a few stablecoins started. The US dollar starting with government. Tether and USDC both started with centralized exchanges. That's how they got their network effects. And of course, DAI started with solving a problem for on-chain natives. So stablecoin go-to-market can start anywhere in this stack. And this drawing is probably doesn't include a lot of other really interesting ways to think about it. Anyone who has ideas about improvising on this, by the way, I'll send you the slide deck, and I'd love to have your ideas. QR code, if you want to deploy your own R token, drop into the Discord for Reserve. We can help out in lots of different ways. There's also a grant program. We'll help developers, protocols, entrepreneurs, anyone who wants to tinker and build. We'd love to help you. How about some questions? Yes, let's get you a microphone if that's okay. I just want to make sure everybody else in the room can hear your question.
Hello.
Yep.
Thank you for the presentation. Do you have some use cases of R tokens being deployed and actually used for something good?
Yeah, so the question is use cases for R tokens being deployed. First one that launched on the protocol February of 2023 was the electronic dollar. It was launched by the MobileCoin blockchain folks. MobileCoin is a privacy L1. Their use case was they're launching a remittance app to be able to send money anywhere around the world privately in less than 5 seconds for the cost of a quarter of a penny, no matter the transaction size. So they launched it. It was originally called the Mobi app. It became a new name called Sentz, S-E-N-T-Z. You can kind of Google that. Subsequently, another project called Ugly Cash has adopted it. And that would be like one example of electronic dollar. By the way, the over-collateralization bank run mechanism I talked about, electronic dollar launched on February 23rd of 2023. March 9th and 10th, USDC, there was a run on Silicon Valley Bank, big DPEG event. While all the other stablecoins depended upon USDC were waiting on A, regulators to backstop the bank, and B, the banks to open on Monday, electronic dollar recollateralized itself, no middleman, by breakfast time on Sunday morning. It's pretty cool, right? There's no DAO decision-making process. There's no middlemen who might make bad decisions during a sort of panicked moment. It worked really well. But yeah, that's one example of the electronic dollar. There's several others. There's like yield-bearing USD3, which I showed. That's picking up steam with like yield hunters and DAO treasuries. And then there's even ETH stablecoins, ETH Plus, created on the Reserve Protocol. It's an LST index that pays the holders about 3% yield on chain, gives them some diversification.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah, we got one question right here, I think. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. It was super interesting. So when we are talking about stablecoins and the evolution of money in general, we should also focus a bit on what the government's doing. I actually only a few days ago found out that the IMF have launched their own CBD as in the form of some global currency that they're working on. So I guess my question is, what do you think about central bank digital currencies and how do they relate to stable coins and their evolution?
Yep. Yeah, so the question's about CBDCs and where that might go. Last I really dove in, there was about 100 experiments, 100 or more experiments going on around the world, different governments looking at CBDCs. Central bank digital currency, they kind of have different definitions depending on who you talk to. And one of the big concerns for some of us are privacy, right? That's a little scary to think about, a government that has control over your money system. But I have actually seen some CBDC experiments that are working with ZK privacy technology to be able to protect the users, right? To be able to provide privacy to the users, yet prove to the government that the money's not being used for any sort of nefarious activities. I think, I have a feeling governments are going to move slower than the innovators at ETH Belgrade and in the current crypto ecosystem. It kind of reminds me of like the early days of Bitcoin. In my experience, kind of like up till 2019, people were still saying the government's going to shut down Bitcoin. You guys might have heard that, and then they were talking about all the other ways that Bitcoin was going to shut down. And now, we just have an ETF and everyone's jumping on board. So I think, and I'm hopeful that, the things that are happening in the Ethereum ecosystem and with stablecoins in particular, I'm hoping the innovation will really just kind of outpace. There's going to be some growing pains along the way, but this is how we learn, and this is how we get to the next better thing. It's kind of what I'm hopeful for. We have maybe one last question, I think we have time for. If anybody has one more question. It appears not. Okay, thank you, everyone. I appreciate your time.